The central thread of Patanjali's philosophy is the relationship between the self, Purusya, and nature, Prakriti. We are born into nature, and without it nothing would move, nothing would change, nothing could happen. We seek to free ourselves from nature in order to transcend it, to achieve lasting freedom. Sensory involvement leads to attachment, desire, frustration, and anger. These bring disorientation and the eventual decay of our true intelligence. Through the combined techniques and resources of yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, and pratyahara, we learn control. These are all external means of restraining consciousness, whether we focus on God or the breath, or in an asana, by learning to direct and diffuse consciousness. All this learning develops in the relationship between the subject and object. It is comparatively simple because it is a relative dual process. But how can subject work on subject? Consciousness on consciousness? How, in other words, can one's eyes see one's own eyes? This is taken from the 3rd chapter, and it is Sutra 9. And I chose this piece because in here, this is Iyengar's commentary on the sutra. And he really, at this point, articulates a question for anyone who has a spiritual practice. And what he's questioning here is, how can I study my consciousness? That's a central question for any practitioner. How can I use my consciousness to study my consciousness? And in this regard, both Patanjali and Iyengar are significant individuals, because what they do is they give us a practice model by which to look at ourselves. So it's not a belief system, it's not a system in which we have to ascribe to a set of values, but it is a means, it is a practice which will give us a way to look at, to study our consciousness. If we go back to the beginning of the sutras, yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations in the consciousness. And yet, it's not just a case of becoming tranquil or calm to seek a release from tension, which we could say there are many ways to become stressless. But in this case, it's a study of consciousness. So we say a practitioner, somebody who has a practice, undertakes a long, what is called an abhyasa, a long, uninterrupted inquiry into the nature of their conscious awareness. It will involve looking at the aspects of consciousness. It will involve differentiating types of states within the consciousness, and it will also involve looking at, as is said in this passage, looking at the way attachment, desire, frustration, anger, these things afflict us, and partially the attachment, the way attachments cause suffering in our lives. Iyengar's method as a method of yoga is a practice method. It's a practice-based learning system. It seeks not so much to do asana or pranayama to get things right, but it's a way, we could say it's the vehicle. You establish yourself within a practice and you return there day by day, observing, we could say observing not just the variables day to day, but the way some days my body may feel dull or tired or tight. Some day the sense of I, the discomfort within me is heightened or at the surface. Some day there's disinterest. So somebody who has a practice, day by day will start to observe things about themselves. Just the fact of returning day by day, I cannot avoid seeing things about myself. And in this way, it is classed as a svadhyaya. So we have a practice which makes me aware of myself. Only when I become competent within that practice can I start to see my attributes, my likes and dislikes, my attachment to some states and my aversion to other states. So we're in this passage at the end where Iyengar says, how can one's eyes see one's own eyes? I think really he's raising a question. How can I separate my experience, or separate from my experience, in order to observe it and to look at its qualities? This derives from a principle within yoga, and I think it's quite a significant principle, and a principle that we should be aware of when we practice, is that yoga sees that we are forces of nature. Right at the outset of this passage, he says, the relationship between the self and nature. We are born into nature, and without it nothing would move, nothing would change, and nothing could happen. So in many ways we are an expression of nature. Some more inclined to dullness, some to vibrancy, some to activity. We have different shapes. We exist as a physical presence, but we also exist as an energetic presence. We exist as mind and emotions, each of us distinct. So each of these sheaths, you could say your physical presence, your energetic presence, your conscious awareness, each of these sheaths exist. Some, obviously the physical plane is most observable, but it's hard to deny that we also have an energetic presence. Each individual's breathing and metabolism will be distinct to that individual. Each individual's conscious awareness, thought patterns, will also be distinct and individual. Guruji's practice of what we now term Iyengar yoga is an examination in the very physical presence, this very substantial presence in the world, in the body. But it is a study of the consciousness, because, and it's a principle that we say manifest or unmanifest. Something might not be seen, and yet it exists. So physically we can work in the body, but in our method it's never the case that we're just working upon the body. We seek through the physical plane and the application, the intense application in asana, to observe the movements, the modifications in consciousness, and through that to study the forces that underpin those movements. So this passage for me articulates a working model that frees me from the anguish and allows me a way to apply myself day to day, to progress within my practice, to observe myself and to learn. And as Guruji says, it's both a theoretical and a practical subject. We apply ourselves, and as we progress within time, or we progress in the passage of time, we also progress in our understanding.